We live or what? What's going on here? Good evening, everybody. Brian Neubert here from goldenblack.com, live once again in his office at home for our third and probably third of many live Sunday night Purdue chat sessions. We're trying to get something established here to see how this all works, to see what we can do with it in the future. As I mentioned on our board before, maybe this is a gateway to post-game chat sessions, pre-game chat sessions, whatever it might be, some sort of way we can enhance, our game day sort of coverage as well. But of the three we've done, this is the one that could go off the rails the worst because we have done significantly less prep work for this one, i.e. none. I have put no thought into this. I have put no preparation into this. And the reason for that is that if you're going to do live anything, if you can't do it live, don't do it live. So we're going to wing it. In this case, what we're going to do is I did take a couple of suggestions for topics from our message board. And then at the end, if anybody has any questions, by all means, please put questions into this little column over here. I will read them and do my best to respond to them. In fact, if somebody could just post something just so I know this is working, that would be much appreciated. Anytime now. Come on, somebody. Thank you. Something. Working. Thank you. Okay, some of the topics we were going to talk about. Obviously, the hot topic this weekend was Purdue's 34-13 loss to TCU yesterday. I know there's going to be a lot of discussion about that in the next couple of days. Not that there hasn't been already, but the first topic that was brought up was about TCU being a Big Ten style of game and whether or not TCU is more of a simulation of a Minnesota or Maryland in kind of the middle of the Big Ten or more in Iowa or Wisconsin, the teams that are generally regarded to be, some of the better, more consistent programs in the Big Ten. I don't know. I would probably say maybe closer to Minnesota because I know Minnesota, what they have right now is kind of similar from a line of scrimmage perspective. I know they've got some good offensive linemen, some good defensive linemen, but I don't know if they're as good as, Wisconsin and Iowa are. I don't know how good TCU is. I know they were good yesterday. They were good last night, that's for sure. But I think time will tell how good they are. I do think the issue with TCU for Purdue, on top of many, obviously, as I mentioned, and we mentioned in our coverage last night, you can't take this outcome and completely separate it from Purdue's circumstances. You can't say Purdue got beat soundly by TCU and not at least mention the fact that they didn't have their starting quarterback. They didn't have the two individual players really that this year's defense was going to be built around. Obviously, this being their first game without Marcus Bailey, their third without Lorenzo Neal. And then we don't even talk about the fact that a team with dire offensive line issues was down probably its best guy. That one's just kind of redundant among all of the other circumstances that weighed into yesterday. But no, I've lost my train of thought. But I do think on top of the circumstances, TCU was ideally suited to kind of rub salt in the wounds that are some of Purdue's limitations this year. This was a line of scrimmage type of game, and Purdue is not going to be a line of scrimmage team, I don't think, this year. They'd have to go a long way in a very short period of time from a personnel perspective for that to be the case. Their offensive line is not their strength. It's not going to be their strength at any point this season. Their defensive line is prohibitively young, missing their most important piece. And it's just not a line of scrimmage type of year for Purdue. And that's what I meant when I said this was a Big Ten style of game. This was a physical between the tackles type of game, and Purdue obviously couldn't stack up. The positive of it is this will help prepare for Purdue for what's coming down the line. The other side of that spectrum is the first test wasn't exactly passed. So how you feel about those games moving forward, extrapolating from this game, it's probably not a positive impression. The next topic I wrote down is just Kalk, K-A-L-K. I assume you're talking about Purdue basketball recruit Ryan Kalkbrenner and not the sealant that is probably toxic. I will go ahead and guess that I'm onto something there. Ryan Kalkbrenner, I don't know. I can't really add much to what Eric Bossie's report late in the week said regarding the Kansas offer, that he doesn't really know what to do about that, whether or not he wants to take a long look at them too, thus setting the process back. Where this really impacted things was from the perspective of, I think Ryan Kalkbrenner was just about ready to sit down and make a decision. Had he done that, I think it's Purdue or Stanford, and I think Purdue has a pretty good chance there. There comes a point in time in some recruitments too, and typically it doesn't work out very well for Purdue when this happens, but when all the stuff that was important from day one to day 500, whatever it might be, all of that stuff starts taking a backseat to just basketball, just the NBA, whatever it may be. Purdue is much more adept these days in recruitments like that because they've developed some really good big men. They've had some pros, perhaps not the same level of pros as the Kansases and the Dukes or whatever, but they have had some success. They're winning. Their brand is strong. They're viewed much more favorably that way than they were many years ago. But still, when you have a kid who for years talks about, or months, whatever it may be, talks about academics, talks about being comfortable, talks about this environment, that environment, at the end of the process, when he starts thinking about the NBA more and more, when he starts thinking about Final Fours, whatever it might be, there's always going to be an advantage for the Kansases, the Dukes, or whatever. And, when the eyes get starry, those programs thrive. I don't know if that's happening or not with Ryan Kalkbrenner, but when Kansas comes knocking, you obviously you always are on high alert. So we'll see what he does about that. There are many practical considerations to be sorted through here. Kansas is not going to invest in him as a player the way a Purdue or a Stanford would. Style of play, I don't know if Kansas is really going to build around a Ryan Kalkbrenner. Purdue in the short term is not going to build around Ryan Kalkbrenner. Purdue's going to develop him, and maybe down the line they're going to play through Ryan Kalkbrenner. But what my point is that, people talk about the importance for recruits of finding the right fit more than the biggest brand, the biggest name. And I think this is one of those cases where, from an academic fit perspective, from a basketball infrastructure perspective, I think Purdue makes a ton of sense. But Purdue makes a ton of sense for a lot of guys. And it's hard for me to not sound completely myopic about this when I say that, because I cover it from the Purdue perspective and I look at it through their pitch, not everyone else's pitch. But Purdue does make a ton of sense for him. Purdue's made a ton of sense for a lot of kids, though, who've gone somewhere else, too. So we'll kind of have to wait and see what he does about Kansas. But at the very least, Kansas seems to have set this process back a little bit, at least. But we will see, obviously, what Kalkbrenner goes on to do here. If he schedules a visit to Kansas, and I know Kansas is trying to get him in for their late night in the fog deal. I don't know what the date on that is, but that's at least weeks away. And if he decides to do that before committing, then you're almost kind of hitting the reset button on this whole process, because we're talking about weeks now when it might have been hours right when they offered. What can Purdue change to run the football, back to football? It's a good question, and something I kind of wrote about in my blog last night was, when Jeff Brom comes out after the game last night and talks about how they have to get better up front, it seems to me on the outside like that is asking for improvement in areas that you don't improve in October. It seems like you're asking for improvement in areas that improve in June, July, off season, not just off seasons, not individual off seasons, but also years of recruiting. It takes you a long time to build up a good physical offensive line. And that is, I just don't think that's something that necessarily changes overnight. I've said from day one about this season that I think, this is another year, and this is not uncommon because Purdue's last two offensive lines haven't exactly been, the greatest in college football. You have to scheme around it. When Purdue's had real success in the past offensively under other staffs, it's been scheming around disadvantages. And, way back in the day under Joe Tiller, they really kind of negated disadvantages around the line of scrimmage by moving east and west, by doing a lot of stuff on the boundaries, by going quick, by obviously the spread offense. Took people by surprise when they first implemented it. But even under Danny Hope, when they didn't have the best offensive lines either, their screen game was generally pretty good. I know fans hated all the screens, but screens make a lot of sense when you have certain personnel limitations. And that's where I think this team might have to go. This team might have to be more screen heavy to kind of generate a running type game in place of an actual running game. It might have to be more misdirection based. Might have to go more east and west more. And I think you have a weapon you can use in that sense in Rondell Moore. You get a lot of eyeballs on him going east to west, and then you can go west when he goes east, or he can go east when you goes west. What? I don't know. But I just thought that's what you'd see last night. I thought you would see a game plan designed to play away from TCU's strengths and away from your weaknesses. But, the more you kind of let the game soak in, the more you realize that when you can't do much of anything in terms of base offense, it's really hard to get people off balance and take advantage of that type of stuff. What came to mind last night was the game in Brom's first year here when Michigan came to Purdue. Purdue couldn't really do a whole lot offensively in that game either, but you remember they sucker punched Michigan with a quick scoring drive, I think right at the end of the first half, where they did 3 kind of like wheel route things. I hate using wheel route over and over again because I don't think everything that people call a wheel route is actually a wheel route. I think it's just a throwback, whatever you want to call it. But they got the defense flowing one way. You can't see this finger. Okay. They got the defense flowing this way, and then they threw it back this way. See that? See what I did there? From here to here. You get the defense moving this way, you throw it this way. And that was actually one of the 3 big plays Purdue made offensively was generated from that type of concept. The one big play by Bryson Hopkins, where Plummer rolled to his right and threw it back left. And Bryson Hopkins made an unbelievable catch. He wasn't even open, but he made an unbelievable catch on that ball. I do think that needs to be Purdue's normal to a certain extent. They have to get defenses off balance any way possible, and they have to get defenses off balance without necessarily being able to run the ball traditionally, and that's a hard thing to do. But they have to use misdirection. They have to use tempo. They have to pass the ball effectively more than anything. I think, Elijah Sindelar's right arm was their best chance to win that game last night. I thought if Sindelar played, this was old Drew Brees at Wisconsin in 1998, drop back 85 times and throw it 70 times, something like that. And Purdue would have, I don't know if Purdue would have won, but they would have scored and they would have gotten some yards. And your play action running game, I'm calling it your play action running game because you're running off the threat of the throw instead of throwing off the threat of the run, would have been effective. You would have gotten a couple of 5-6 yard gains simply off the defense being back on its heels because you knew what Sindelar was going to do. Purdue's just got to get its passing game going to the point where it sets up the run better. That's not anything uncommon. That's not anything revelatory, anything particularly new about the season. That's what Purdue's been doing the last 2 years. They just have to do it the best they've ever done it now if they want to have any sort of offensive balance. And when I talk about offensive balance, again, I've said this the last couple of weeks, it doesn't matter at the end of the day where your yards came from, as long as the yards were generated. It matters in 3rd and 1 and 3rd and 2, where you simply cannot line up and get a yard because you're not built to do it. You can't be one-dimensional in situations like that and have to throw the ball. You got to get people off balance. You got to get them moving around and take advantage of where they're not. I have a bunch of calls into people, a bunch of texts into people. It's very possible that my phone rings during this thing. That would be interesting. But hopefully it doesn't happen. Oh, I'm sorry, hopefully it does happen, but hopefully it waits later. Another question here on Jalen Graham. We posted our snap counts earlier today, and Jalen Graham didn't play as much as he did in the first couple games. What to chalk that up to? I think Jalen Graham is going to be a really good player. I think he's a really talented player. I think he's going to be an outstanding player, but he is a freshman, and there's going to be mistakes. There's going to be missed tackles. There's going to be things that are amplified when you play safety. In the first game at Nevada, I think he broke down on the 4th down touchdown, and that was obviously a big play. I think yesterday on one of the long touchdowns, he took a bad angle, missed the tackle. That led to another touchdown. If you play any other position but safety, that stuff gets hidden. When it's safety and you're a freshman and your inexperience shows, it really, really shows. I think this season is going to be a learning process for him, obviously. And you can almost kind of see it. You can see him learning. I've got a pen now. Pretty cool, huh? If you go back and watch the Nevada game, on one of their long touchdowns, Graham is giving chase from behind and looks like he pulls up inside the 10. It looks like he stops running. Whereas if he would have dove at the guy's ankles, he might have gotten him. I don't know if he would have gotten him. Nevada probably would have scored anyway, even if he did. But he might have gotten him. But it looked like he laid up a little bit. The next game, he was in the same position on the 75-yard touchdown Vanderbilt scored. And he busted his ass to get all the way down the field, laid out to try to get the guy from behind just as he was about to cross the goal line. And the week 1 to week 2 difference really put a face on a freshman learning on the fly. And I just think it's going to be a process with him, just like it's going to be a process with all these young guys. George Karlaftis looks like a world beater right now. He is not going to get through this season without making a couple mistakes. That's just life when you're a young player. David Bell, of course, we don't know what David Bell's deal is right now because he got hurt yesterday, but same deal. He's going to make mistakes. King DeRue, all of the freshmen. Jack Plummer at quarterback. I almost said Jake. I caught myself. They're all going to make mistakes. That is life as a young player, and that's the situation Purdue is now in. It's been decapitated of its experience. Its senior class is damn near gone right now, at least in terms of being available for this last game. And this was a young team even with that senior class because there's not very many seniors. That's the good problem that comes with your most talented players being your young players. When you upgrade recruiting the way Purdue has upgraded its recruiting, that is what you deal with. That is a good problem to have, but that is a problem nonetheless. And it is just something Purdue's going to have to play through with some guys who are going to be really good players, who are really talented players, but are just going to have to get there from an experience perspective. This is a really good question. This is a really good question and something I've wanted to kind of talk about. I didn't know how to bring it up, but the importance of resiliency of fan support this season. Obviously, we don't know how the rest of the season is going to turn out for Purdue. They're 1-2 right now. They've lost 2 games. They're very disappointing. There are circumstances at play. Obviously, that some of those circumstances are not changing. They're not going where Marcus Bailey is not coming back. The offensive line is not going to become the 2000 offensive line during the bye week. But the resiliency of the fan support, keeping fans excited, I think it's critical. I think it's, fans are part of programs, whether they know it or not. A program is your facility, it's your team, it's your infrastructure, it's your support, it's your leadership, it's all of those things, but it's also your support base. It's your fans. And the fact that Purdue lost that game last night, the way it lost that game last night, doesn't change the fact that Purdue is playing in that environment these days. And that is critical to Purdue, that the fans are engaged, that you have nights like this, that Purdue got a commitment off of last night. They lost a game in hideous fashion, and they got a wide receiver to commit a day after or a day before. I don't know when he actually committed. A game in which you could barely complete a pass. I mean, that shows you the power of that environment. What the Ohio State game did, and that was a magical night for Purdue, an outlier sort of night, but what that did for recruiting, what that did for the overall standing of the program was remarkable. And that's what fans control. And where fans can control that is when times get bad, don't get bad too. It goes both ways on you. The enthusiasm that Purdue has enjoyed here the last 3 years has done so much for the program. But when it goes the other way, and I'll use Indiana basketball as an example, things get toxic and it really hurts the program. You can really, really help the program when things are good, but it can really, really hurt the program when things are not good. So the important thing is that for Purdue, which has been so good at keeping momentum going one way or another, keeping buzz going here these first couple of years under Jeff Brom, it just needs to keep that going. Obviously, as Brom always says, they've got to do their part on the field. They have to be competitive. They have to be entertaining. And last night, obviously, they did not do that. But what they will hope for, obviously, is that even if this season doesn't go as hoped, the fans stay there with them. So, but that is very important. It's very important to keep that environment going, that support base going. Revenue Obviously, Purdue has spent a lot of money on football, and needs it to pay off. They have spent money to make money, and the spending is behind it. Now they need to make it because they've got a lot invested in this program. And when I say they've got a lot invested in the program, I'm not just talking about the South End Zone. I'm not just talking about Jeff Brohm's contract. I'm talking about all that comes with it. Brohm has brought stars to Purdue, stars, and that is what you're paying for. You're paying for, not in a literal sense, but you're paying for the environment last night as well. You're paying for the experience of big-time college football. And Purdue just needs its support to stay steady, even if things don't go as hoped. When I say stay steady, I mean the fans standing by them, even if things don't go as anticipated, as hoped, however you want to term it. So those are the topics I wrote down. If anybody's got any questions to add over here, please, not everybody at once. Do you want questions here or in the thread? Give me some questions here, please. How would you assess Plummer's first start, given his first actual game action came under less than ideal circumstances? Yeah, I think you have to. I think you have to take into account just the circumstances of it all. I know Purdue was preparing all week for the possibility they wouldn't have Sindelar, but it sounded like Plummer didn't find out he was starting until Friday. Didn't give Purdue probably much time to build an offense for him. It's really hard, to build two different offenses. And it sounded to me like, I think Jeff Brohm's a very forthright guy. I don't think he's a misleader. Obviously there's a certain measure of gamesmanship that goes on everywhere during the week about injuries and whatnot, as there should be. I mean, no coach should tell us on Thursday who's not playing. That's just my personal opinion. There's nothing to be gained from telling us who's not playing. And but I always try to put myself in other people's shoes in their handling of situations. And if I were them, I wouldn't want people knowing who I didn't have on Thursday. But the point is that when he said he was optimistic on his radio show Thursday about Sindelar playing, I thought that meant that they were going to have Sindelar. So that leads me to believe maybe they thought they were going to have Sindelar. So I doubt that they were necessarily putting in two offenses. So I don't know what sort of infrastructure was in place for Plummer to be really good. When you look at the other limitations of this offense on top of his experience deficit, I think he was in a really tough spot. I do think, if you watch that fourth quarter when stuff didn't matter, it was over. He was competing. He was making plays. He was under siege. I mean, he was pressured. I don't remember what the number was, 17, 18 times. Obviously, he made some mistakes as a freshman. The interception on the flea flicker was not good, but he had no running game. He had no protection really to speak of. Really a difficult situation for the young quarterback into. So I really think you have to weigh that. But I do think he did some pretty positive things, and I certainly wouldn't draw any sort of conclusions on him one way or the other. I'm not going to say he's going to be great because he did some positive things. I'm not going to say he has no future here because he didn't play well against a really good defense. I think that's part of it too, is TCU, it's not like he made his first career start against somebody with a bad defense or somebody who doesn't play defense at all. He could have played, had he played a lesser opponent, the outcome might have been different, but you probably wouldn't have really gotten a whole lot out of that. So I would say, and this is just a big word salad here I'm giving you, I'm just rambling. I would say I wouldn't look at it as too strong of a tell on his future in either direction. But I think he did enough good things to say, hey, that's not all bad for his first start under very difficult circumstances. So now that I filibustered that question, we'll move on to the next one. Daru took the reins from Horvath in the second half. Do you think that is likely to continue? Purdue can't sustain holes long enough to get through them, and we need someone with more burst in the backfield. I would agree to the latter point. Purdue could really use somebody with some more burst. I think Horvath is fine in certain situations. I think he's a guy who will get you what's blocked. The problem for this offense is getting things blocked. And now I don't think King Daru, just because he's faster and quicker, is necessarily going to change things overnight, but he might get to a spot a little bit quicker than Horvath. I do like Horvath, but I do think that people ought to look at him differently. People look at him like he's supposed to be some sort of outstanding running back, some sort of game changer offensively. Really, he's a piece. And pieces don't work when the overall mosaic of things generally is breaking down. I think Horvath can be a productive player for an offense when other things are working. I think, though, that when a guy's a walk-on and he ascends to a starting position, people naturally view him differently and kind of hold it against him. And I think people should view Horvath a little bit differently. I think he's a good enough player to help Purdue win. I think in a situation where his blocking is breaking down, I know maybe he's not hitting the holes necessarily he should be hitting here and there. I think I heard that from some coaches last week. There's a phone call. But I do think he's a good piece for Purdue, but things around him have to be working. In terms of King Daru, the experience is going to come out. I mean, pass protection is going to be an issue, and I think he can be a really good player in time. Whether that time is right now, I don't know, but all the same dynamics apply to him as well. I mean, if Purdue's not getting things blocked, if Purdue's not passing the ball effectively, and people are sitting on the running game, nobody's doing anything. You could have Barry Sanders back there, and I don't think it's going to make all of that big of a difference. Do you have a David Bell update? I do not. He hurt his shoulder per Jeff Brom after the game yesterday. It being the bye week, we don't have much media availability this week. We'll see what Brom says on his radio show Wednesday night from Westfield. There's no press conference this week, but our next chance to ask Brom will be next week after the bye week. So we wouldn't expect much until then, at least. But obviously, Purdue will have its fingers crossed that its freshman wide receiver David Bell is okay after suffering a apparent shoulder injury. I didn't actually see it happen. I think it was the one where he had to dive for an incompletion, and then I just know he went right to the tent, and then he came off the field. But, the one thing I said about him after high school is, as awesome a prospect as he was, awesome a high school player he was, he did have some bad luck with injuries. He did have a lot of little nagging deals. Obviously, he had the hamstring issue too at the start of training camp. You just hope for his sake he's not one of those guys that just has nothing but bad luck when it comes to injuries. Shoulder injuries are never good for young players. Shoulder injuries are never good for any player. So obviously Purdue is going to hope like hell that this isn't anything to be all that concerned about, but we'll have to wait and find out, I guess. Did they give details on McCann's ankle injury? It is not the dreaded high ankle sprain. I have no idea. Tom Dienhart is more of our day-to-day football information guy. I'm just sort of our resident carnival barker. So I can't really answer that question. Can this team get to 6 wins? Yeah, I don't see why not. I mean, I think when you get your quarterback back, that automatically changes things from what this isn't just about personnel. I also think Purdue is going to grow into this team to a certain extent. I think, if you get Lorenzo Neal back, that's a pretty big piece. I think the defense can get better through the course of the season. It was pretty disappointing from a Purdue perspective, I think, what they did against the run yesterday against TCU. Obviously, Lorenzo Neal and Marcus Bailey lost notwithstanding, but, just for them to tackle the way they tackled and to wear down again, kind of like they did in the second half against Nevada, that young defensive front is, in a little bit of can get in some compromising positions there. But I think the defense can get better because you're playing some young guys who are going to get better. It isn't just George Karlaftis. It isn't just Jalen Graham. It's, defensive tackle Lawrence Johnson hasn't played much. You had defensive tackle Jack Sullivan out there quite a bit 2 games ago, and I think 18 snaps yesterday. He's never been out there. You're playing a lot of guys who really haven't played a lot of football. And it just kind of stands to reason to suggest that as they get more experience, they're going to get a little bit better. I do think that once you get Elijah Sindelar back, I think, you're going to be able to score some points on people. Again, it might be sort of that drop back and throw it 70 times here and there type of game, but you can beat people that way. I think we'll find out a little bit about, what kind of weapons he's going to have. They've got to keep Preston Hopkins healthy. They've got to keep Rondell Moore healthy. We'll see what happens with David Bell, but they still have some weapons offensively. I think they can do some real damage. from an offensive perspective, chucking it around. But I also think this coaching staff will kind of have some things following the bye week, probably offensively, that can amplify their strengths a little bit better and negate their weaknesses a little bit better. Somebody's asking me about Malik Carr, how his visit went. Well, I could have told you had I not been on this, because he just called me. Of course he did. So I'm going to call Malik Carr back, find out how the visit went, and I will let you guys know. So that looks like our last question anyway. So on that note, boy, they're 52. Call him back. We'll stay quiet. Yeah, or we're not going to do that. But I appreciate your enthusiasm. So thanks, everybody, for joining us here. As I mentioned before, I think this went okay. Didn't go terribly. We might use this as a gateway of sorts to do maybe some post-game chats after basketball games, maybe some pregame sort of stuff, whatever it might be. So if you have any recommendations for how we can do this better or anything like that, by all means, I'm all ears. Let me know. Until then, we'll do this again Sunday night, unless we just decide, what the hell, let's just do one right now. And I just drop one in your lap on Tuesday afternoon or something like that, just on a whim. We might do that too periodically, following big news or something like that. So that's what I got. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next week, if not sooner. Figure out how to stop this thing. Stream.